historian Patrick French is here in Chennai for the launch of his new book, India, a Portrait, a very, very engaging read. We're at the third section of the book, which is called Samaj, which looks at the rise of the Dalits, the spread of Maoist thought, crime, corruption and religion. I mean, because we don't have much time, and I also want to ask you some questions outside the book. I was wondering if you can just sum up this for our audience.
I think you just summed it up admirably, but I mean, it is taking on these big subjects, like, for example, why was there a particular situation in the 1950s when it seemed that there should not be a common civil code, a universal civil code for all Indians? Looking at that, looking at questions of caste, looking at the issue of servants in society and how they are treated. Looking at the crime and how it's not investigated, and it's the terrible case of my dentist, Dr. Rajesh Talwar, whose daughter Arushi was murdered, and he then himself was hounded by, first of all, the police in Noida, and then by the CBI, and he's somebody who I believe with complete certainty is innocent. So essentially it was the state persecuting him because they couldn't solve the problem. And then the very last chapter of the book looks at these very broad ideas about religion and the way that certain groups in India have particular ideas. You know, why is it that, for example, a lot of software engineers come from places like Karnataka and Tamil Nadu? Is there something in the cultural background that helps to explain that skill? So these very broad, general ideas finish the book.
So all this complex material, I want to know how you research and how you organize all of this. Do you have help? Do you have research assistants? How do you go about it?
I had some help in locating specific pieces of information, economic data. For example, you know, discovering how every Lok Sabha MP got there is quite hard. So we were contacting a lot of different political journalists all across India and pulling in that information. But essentially, all the research and all of the writing is completely myself. And you know, the best filing system you have is your brain. It's what you remember that's most important. It's not the fact that you've taken hundreds of pages of notes. The essence of a story is always clear to you.
So do you also wear a white cap then if your brain is a computer? No, we must tell them why we made that
Okay, this is a reference to the Dabbawalas of Mumbai, and the fact that their leader, Mr. Telekar, said that you know, the reason they wear the white cap is because it's a computer cover.
Which is why I asked Patrick whether he wears a white cap to protect his computer of a brain. You've met so many fascinating characters in the course of your research, politicians, ordinary people, you know, such a broad canvas. Any particular favorites, any inspiring stories?
Oh gosh, so many. I mean, you know, someone like Sunil Mittal of Airtel was fascinating. He was very stimulating to talk to, full of new ideas, and I hadn't really expected, you know, that kind of conversation to come out of it. I mean, all across India there were different people with completely different ideas and aspirations at every level. You know, even the guy in the winery in Nasik in Maharashtra, who came from an Adivasi background, when he was talking about, you know, what he'd been doing when he was a child, he only went to school for one day in his life. And then he went home again because there was no teacher. And now he's able to send his children to school and aspire to send them to college. But then he's got the difficulty, how does he know where to send them to college? Because nobody from his community has ever been there. And so then he said, well, maybe I could consult some Mahadev Kohlis who've moved to the city. It was a great opening out. It was a very collaborative process researching the book.
You know, Arvind Adiga in his review says that this book is not as good as The World Is What It Is. He says, French's prose style, which came so close to perfection in his Nepal biography, has become overripe here. And it's not a very flattering review either, but we won't go into that because I really liked the book.
Well,
very much.
I should maybe just say, I mean, he is a notoriously grumpy fellow. And if you think of a book like The White Tiger, which is ridden with cliches, I don't have any problem with taking a copy of India, a Portrait, and pushing a white tiger aside.
Well, that's a topic for another discussion. But what I wanted to ask you is this your best book, or am I asking you to choose between, I mean, choose your favorite child?
Yeah. Yes. Well, I think I'm equally fond of my three children. But with the books, it's hard to know. I mean, the thing about the V.S. Naipaul biography, The World Is What It Is that it's quite depressing, even though it's a remarkable story. But there's a dynamism to India, a Portrait, and there's a kind of scope to it, which made it incredibly enjoyable to write. I wrote it quite quickly. I'm normally a slow writer, but this one just kind of galloped along. And so certainly at the moment it's my favorite book.
Favorite. You know, this has been bothering me. Yeah? When you talk about Mahatma Gandhi's assassination,
yes,
in page 26 and 29, you never mention Godse's name. You always say he was a follower of the movement, a Hindu extremist, but why don't you mention him by name?
Why didn't I mention Godse's name? I don't think there was any explanation
No,
for that. It
okay.
just didn't seem particularly important.
Okay, yeah. It just struck me as
Okay.
odd, yeah. So somebody asked this question. I'd like to ask you again about your impressions of India before and after this book, because this must have been quite a, you know,
Yes.
cathartic, epiphanic process.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I travelled so widely from Ladakh, and where I met an old man who'd watched Jawaharlal Nehru's aeroplane landing on an improvised airstrip in 1949, and yet I was also in the east and in the west and in Kanyakumari. So, I had a lot of very different responses, but at the end, as I explained earlier, it was the sense of aspiration and of possibility, and the fact that India appeared to be on the move that made me feel overall optimistic, despite all the things that are not yet right.
But I wouldn't agree with that, optimistic. A lot of people use the word optimistic even at your book launch. I think you're just being realistic and you're
exactly
presenting
I'm glad you say that.
Yeah.
I'm being realistic.
Yeah.
Sometimes being optimistic is the realistic option.
I don't know about that. That sounds very
No,
deep
what I mean
and
is that if the information that you learn makes you feel, well, actually things in many fundamental ways are good, even if on the surface they may not be quite right, then that makes you feel optimistic. But to me, that's a form of realism.
No, I just think you've called the book right. You call it a portrait, and that's what it is. I don't see optimism or pessimism. It's a portrait.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, my last question.
Okay.
What else do you like apart from Bhel Puri and thumbs up?
What else do I like? I actually, my wife is from the north of India, from Delhi, and so the trouble is that I actually prefer mainly the food that you find in the south. So if I've got the choice of Chettinad food, which we were eating earlier today, or a dosa, or eating an idli, I'll always tend to take the southern option.
So we'll come back soon to this land of the polite audience.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Okay.
Thank you. Patrick French, writer and historian.